Tune into ESG Matters with Risk Insights, where we explore ESG with impact. Hey everyone, it's me Anushka Bogdanov, and welcome back to another episode of ESG Matters with Risk Insights. I hope everyone is having a wonderful week thus far. Before we dive into today, I wanted to welcome all participants of BRICS to South Africa. I hope that the Global South work together in making the South prosperous, equitable, and sustainable for all its people. Our world is ever changing, and change is unavoidable. You have probably seen the news on the current strikes that are occurring in the Hollywood industry. For the past 100 days, the Screen Actors Guild and Hollywood writers have been on strike. One of the reasons for the strike is the fear of artificial intelligence reducing the reliance on stunt actors through more cheaper and powerful techniques that are being explored to create the high action stunts we see in movies through AI. Studios want to create realistic digital replicas of performers to use for the rest of eternity in any project they want, all for the payment of one day of work. AI at the digital age is an age of advancement, but the change and impact it will have on livelihoods is vast, and therefore we must be able to plan forward and keep social risk low. The same is true for climate change. We can see the changes in climate patterns across the globe. So, to mitigate social risks, we must plan for a better circular economy, reduce waste, recycle more, and reduce our carbon footprint. Disruption in this new era is unavoidable. ESG Matters with Risk Insights has heard some of the impactful leaders celebrate Women's Month with us, providing us with a toolkit to manage risk. Martin Sweet shared the scary reality behind GBV in South Africa and the impactful programs he drives to create change through What About the Boys? Irene Kino shared her tips for women to succeed and drive sustainable leadership roles. And for today's surprise, we are humbled to be joined by Dr. Vinika Rao from INSEAD. She shares her insights around the impact of male allyship on gender balance, an interesting view. So before we begin, let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Rao and her impressive career. Dr. Vinika Rao is the Executive Director of INSEAD Africa Initiative and the Hoffman Global Institute for Business and Society Asia. She's also the adjunct professor of Singapore Management University. She sits on several boards and advisory boards, including TIE Singapore, European Women on Boards, Live with AI, 9x9, and Hearth Ventures. She advises global organizations on diversity and inclusion and sustainability initiatives. She is also the ambassador, Power Women of Africa, and she's on the International Advisory Committee of Modi University for Women, and she also serves on the SP Jane Return to Work program, and she's an ambassador, She 2030 Europe, and the Advisory Council of Board Matchup Asia. Vinika's research specializes in diversity and inclusion in leadership, allyship, and intergenerational influences on the future of the workplace. This topic is fascinating and is a good toolkit to manage risk in many organizations. Vinika is frequently invited to speak on related topics and is quoted and published in leading business publications, so it's an absolute privilege to have a woman of her caliber, an academic scholar and leader on today's podcast. So thank you, Vinika, for being here today. Vinika also started her career with MNC Bank and went on to become the managing director of an Asian conglomerate before making an unexpected transition to education, something that I'm extremely passionate about. Prior to joining INSEAD, she was an associate professor of strategy at SP Jain School of Global Management. She has taught MBA, executive MBAs, and undergrad students and conducted specialized programs for corporate clients. She's an alumni of INSEAD, International Directorship Program, Singapore Management University DBA award winning doctorate in leadership diversity, IIM Bangalore MBA, and has completed various management programs. Dr. Rao believes that business has the potential to be a force for good, led by managers who value social impact and are committed to the UN Sustainability Development Goals. She is passionate about supporting women managers to make fulfilling work life decisions, aiming to do this through active sponsorship rather than just mentorship alone. She strives to engage all genders in the effort to foster DEI in their organizations and communities. Wow, Vinika, that is a thesis of a biography. Truly, truly impressive. So thank you for joining us today here on ESG Matters with Risk Insights.
Thank you so much, Anushka, for getting bravely through that bio and for a very gracious introduction. It's really wonderful to be here. I'm a great admirer of your work in Africa on ESG and on DEI, as well as your personal courage. So it's a special pleasure for me to be speaking to you today.
So let's dive right in, Vinika. Why don't we start by talking about the pyramid effect or leaky pipelines? Interesting terminology for our listeners. So let me tell you what is leaky pipelines. It's a metaphor or a reference to the way members of a certain demographic fail to continue progression towards particular careers, leading to an underrepresentation in related industries. So, Dr. Rao, can you explain in more detail the impact this has on gender balance for the globe and maybe on an African context perspective?
Absolutely, Anushka. As you introduced, it's the phenomenon of the historical underrepresentation of women in corporate leadership, meaning in senior management and board positions, which we all know is a serious problem for business all over the world and including very much so in Africa too. And I think this is a subject that's particularly relevant in the context of, in Women's Month in South Africa. So I'm happy to be talking to you about this today. So, even as finding gender diverse leadership talent is a struggle, retention of the women who have been hired and trained is sometimes an even larger problem for companies. Corporate resources are substantially depleted every time an experienced female manager who's had years of expensive training both on and off the job makes the decision to give up the fight. And she does this because the challenges associated with moving to the next levels of organizational leadership outweigh the perceived benefits. The worst part is that women tend to fall off just when they're at their most valuable and where it hurts their organizations the most. Research has shown that this mid career pre leadership stage is a highly vulnerable one for women due to the increased and often conflicting pressures that they feel on the personal and the professional side. The personal challenges are mostly to do with what social scholars call family formation, so marriage and maternity, for instance. And on the professional end, we know that more senior roles come with greater advancement potential, but also many more challenging responsibilities. So, where the personal sacrifices are not countered by organizational and supervisorial enablers that make this leadership journey easier and more worthwhile, many women then do, unfortunately, make the choice to leave. And of course, the negative consequences of this to their employers are many. And so companies are doing a lot now to avoid this. We hear about specialized training, women's networks, family friendly work practices, flexibility of time and location, structured mentorship and sponsorship programs, unconscious bias training, and even the controversial Q word, quotas. There's a lot of practitioner writing on the subject, media articles, various indices and reports are published. I myself have contributed to several of those. For instance, every year we see a lot of action, especially around International Women's Day in March. And I'm sure you're seeing that, Anushka, in this special month in August in South Africa. I think I personally spoke at over 20 events and webinars just a few months ago, all focused on advancing gender balance in leadership roles in our organizations and communities. Regulatory authorities are also exerting pressure. Many countries have imposed quotas, at least at the board level. And in academic writing, also, the research on underrepresentation of women in leadership has been quite oriented towards identifying the individual, the firm, and environmental level barriers that impede female success. Perhaps a little less on the enablers that have supported some women to succeed. And that's actually what I'm most interested in. I've always been interested in understanding the reason for the variability between the experiences of different women as they face this steep slope of high level corporate career success. I wonder what are the enablers at the organizational level, at the supervisorial level, and at the individual levels that explain why some women manage to overcome those challenges and have excellent leadership careers, while so many others fall off, as you said in your introduction to the idea of a leaky pipeline. Of course, there are many personal reasons for such success, but surely there are environmental enablers that have a role to play. Now, among the factors that have been studied as possible enablers, there has been significant interest from practice and a more restrained interest from academia into the positive impact of male allyship, or what some refer to as championship or support. And that's a subject I'm particularly interested in and happy to talk more about as we go along.
That's so interesting. Now, your extensive research focuses on how male allyship can impact the career progress of women leaders. Could you share some of your key findings with our listeners?
Thank you, Anushka. Very important question indeed. And yes, I've also long been interested in the concept of allyship. How majority groups or people in relatively privileged positions can support and advance the interests of minorities or underprivileged groups or marginalized groups. I'm interested in the specific context of women in senior leadership positions and the role that male allyship can play in fixing this gender leak in the leadership pipeline that we were talking about earlier. For me, actually, this interest culminated in a doctoral thesis on the subject of how male leaders can modify the motivation of their female followers to enhance their pursuit of career progress. So, my research explored three possible categories of enablers that could positively impact female career progress. At the organizational level, at the supervisorial level in terms of their bosses, and at the individual levels. So, of these, after many in depth interviews, questionnaires, and much analysis of data, very interestingly, male leadership support emerged as a common factor impacting women's motivation to advance in their careers for our responders in that research. Now, male support has become one of the factors that practitioners are actively pursuing as a potential game changer. I found this in my interview data with many of the managers I spoke with. Many of them indicated that their companies are exploring this. For instance, organizations now quite often insist on including men actively, even in the women's networks that they had originally set up exclusively for women to foster sharing and role modeling, between women. In fact, I was interested to see that two of the men in my sample for the project were actually helming the so called women's networks in their organizations. So that's the extent to which the presence and the involvement and active engagement of male allies is considered relevant. There's more restrained but growing interest in academia too. In recent years, various studies have explored the impact of male support as a potential key influencer on female career success. However, the mechanism through which its positive effect transpires is perhaps not quite established by research yet so far. So, our research showcased one possible mechanism for this. We had specific examples of women managers talking through how they were chronically inclined to perhaps avoid major career risks. But when primed by strong and active allyship from their bosses, the kind of support that went beyond just mentorship to true sponsorship, they were motivated to modify their behavior and take on the kind of chances and well thought through risks, stepping out of their comfort zones, putting their hands up for that next important advancement opportunity, etc., which is generally essential for career progress. In a paper that we published on the subject, there are actually many specific quotes from women of how this impacted their careers, which I found very interesting. And the underlying mechanism for this involves a shift in what is known as the regulatory focus of a woman's behavior. Again, something I'm happy to discuss further if you like.
I think that male allyship is a good toolkit in organizations to improve female representation through sponsorship. I myself was sponsored by some of the current CEOs in the banking sector in South Africa. So, a massive thank you to you, Vinika, for joining us today. And it's been so interesting to hear your views on managing gender balance and inclusivity in the workplace. Thank you to all the listeners for tuning in for this week's ESG Matters with Risk Insights. Male allyship is not an answer to gender balance, but it is a toolkit to manage gender risk and create a more inclusive, dynamic workplace through sponsorship of women leaders. At Risk Insights, everyone's views and opinions matter because it creates a toolkit for managing inherent and residual risks. A massive thank you to everyone for the likes, the views, and the constant support I've been receiving throughout my podcast. It's so interesting reading about everyone's insights after a podcast. So I can't wait to read more about what you think about this week. Once again, my name is Anushka Bogdanov, and tune in again next week for another episode of ESG Matters with Risk Insights. Ciao for now.